Welcome everybody. We'll be waiting a few minutes to get started as a courtesy to those who'll be still in the middle of connecting. We'll look at starting probably about 4 minutes past. Thank you. Okay, good morning everyone, and thanks for joining us today and being part of our community. We have some great content planned, but before we get started, I just want to go over some housekeeping. Feel free to ask questions at any time by typing in the IM window. Be aware that anything you post will be publicly visible. If you prefer, you can post your questions anonymously by checking the box right below where you enter your question. We've had a large number of people register for this webinar. We're thrilled to see this level of interest. It's really great, but please bear in mind it may not be possible to answer all your questions in real time during the session. We do have people standing by to answer your questions, and we'll do our best to get to as many as we can during the call. We've also got some Q&A planned at the end where hopefully we can get Dennis to sort of delve into some of these popular topics. However, if you visit aka.ms/AIPQ&A, you'll see a post dedicated to all the questions that come up through these webinar series. We'll review the question transcript after this session, and we will post further questions to that location. If you're listening to the recording of today's webinar after the event and you have a question, you can also post those questions in that location as well. We are recording today's webinar, and this will be shared publicly. We'll be posting the recordings on our community at aka.ms/AIP recordings. So talking of community, if you're not already signed up, do please come and join us, aka.ms/security community. This is the best way to ensure that you don't miss out on any future webinars. It's also where we post the majority of our announcements, and it's a great place where you can interact directly with our engineering teams that create these security products. You'll be able to influence our product designs, get early access to changes by doing things like participating in private previews, requesting features, reviewing our roadmap, and attending in-person events and webinars like we're doing today. As I mentioned, we have some great content planned. Today's session is part 2 of 6 in a series of Azure Information Protection, or AIP for short. Throughout this series, we'll be walking you through all the major features of AIP and showing you how to deliver and configure each part. So I'd like to introduce you to the team on the call today. We have Dennis Mazetsky, who'll be presenting and is one of our resident AIP experts on the call. He's a program manager in our AIP team and part of the product group. As part of his role, Dennis is responsible for the AIP scanner, so he's well suited to the topic we're talking about today. On the call, we also have Raphael, Avi, Chen, and Martin to help answer questions. And so that's the housekeeping covered. I'll pass this over to Dennis. Thank you.
Thank you, Adam, and I'm very happy to have all of you on this call. Then, as Adam told, we're going to talk about discovery. This is the agenda for this session. There are a few pillars in MIP. Then we're going to cover the discovery story for data on-prem, for endpoints, and for cloud. I will finish with the best practices and some roadmap around all these topics. And this is what it is about, and I will try to keep last 10 minutes for questions. Then discovery in MIP. Just a short introduction to MIP to put everybody on the same page. MIP is about protecting your data. And protecting your data starts with understanding your data, and understanding your data is actually the discovery part. Then, in the old days, we all kept our data on premises. Our users, devices, apps, data everything was there. But now we're already not on the same place. Our data is everywhere, and we understand that discovery should cover not only the on-prem, it should cover all possible locations for data. And we're trying to get feeds from every possible workload. AIP scanner is just one of them that deals actually with the legacy world that is still on-prem. But we are also I'm also going to cover what we can do with the rest of locations, like what happens on the clients, if clients work in the hybrid world and work with on-prem and cloud, and finally what happens with data that already went to cloud. Then the concept of AIP is around start with discovery and classification. Once you know where is your data, tag it, label it, and start enforcing your policy on it, which is protection and more mechanisms like Endpoint DLP and others. You can integrate the AIP with the third parties. You can use different controls that we provide on AIP portal and SEC portal. Monitor and remediate, and get yourself compliant with different compliances. Then in this session, as I told, we are going to talk mainly about the discovery part. I will steal a bit from future presentations and tell how you can use the discovery part for investigations, classification, and protection. But this session is going to be mainly about what you can discover and how we can understand where is your sensitive data. Then your data can be on premises, your data can be on endpoints, your data can be in the cloud. Then we have 4 different workloads that can help you to understand where is your data and what type of data you own and your users work with. Then the first one is AIP scanner. AIP scanner can go and crawl your on-premises repositories like file shares and SharePoint. Another ones are covering the hybrid world. They're covering the endpoint. It's AIP client and Windows Defender EDP. Then we will talk about the discovery of data that is processed, created, modified on the endpoint and stored to different locations, local drives, on-prem repositories, or cloud repositories. And finally, we have MCAS, Microsoft Cloud App Security, that covers the data that is already in the cloud. Then let's start from the on-premises repository discovery. And MIP piece for discovery of on-premises repositories, as I told, it's AIP scanner. Then what AIP scanner can do today? It can scan file shares, NAS repositories, and actually any. And actually any CIFS-based repository that can be accessed by scanner. And SharePoint 2013-2016, we also support scanning of SharePoint 2010 for those of you that have the extended support for SharePoint 2010. Once the data is scanned, the scanner can run in two modes. Discovery mode, we just inspect the content and report what content was detected in the file and what label could be applied on the file based on your policy. You can define your policies based on content, on file location, or on custom property, which is the file metadata. And then you can also label and protect files. It's an optional step. Usually customers start with discovery only, understand what they get from the scanning results, and then either tweak their policy or go with it and enable enforcement, which applies your AIP policy on discovered files, and then it labels and protects files. It's very important to understand it's not a separate policy. It's exactly the same policy that you use for your AIP clients. You can create different scopes and instruct scanner to do different things, like things that client doesn't do, but you don't have to create a separate policy for scanner. It just applies the same policy that you have for clients. And once the scanner finishes its job with discovery or label and protection, you get a report of what was discovered and what was done. I'm going to cover both central logging, which is our recommendation for getting the scanner information, but I will also talk about how it can work in hybrid or disconnected environment. There is also local reporting on the scanner machine, a bit less comfortable to work with, but this is what you get when you want to work completely offline. Why did we come with this feature to the world? It was open. I think it was released in GA around 18 months ago, and this was the main driver from customers that we heard why they need discovery and handling data at rest. Then AIP client was there already for more than a year, and customers told us, okay, we have a compliance that requires us to classify everything, and we do it very well with the AIP client for all the new content, but what about the content that we got before AIP, or customers migrating from another classification solutions? We don't want to lose all this, effort that we invested in labeling existing data with our previous solution. Another one was we still have systems that didn't integrate with the EMIP SDK and cannot label files while they create and generated reports. And these files are generated and stored in SharePoint or file shares. Then this was one scenario when we wanted to complement the work that is done by AIP client for all data at rest that was already there. And the second main request was we want to migrate to cloud, but we have questions. We don't know what's going there. We want to understand what data is going to the cloud before we decide to migrate. And we might need to label and encrypt this data before it goes to cloud. And some of you also told us that maybe we don't want to move everything, like 95% of our data can go to the cloud, but we want to keep our most toxic data on premises. And it will save a lot of resources on your premises, but you still want to keep something there. Then you need to understand what data you have before it goes to the cloud. Then this was the second most common use case for scanning of data at rest. And this is what we delivered when we delivered the scanner. Then we can discover sensitive information types on premises repositories. We can label and protect data based on regulations or different compliances. For example, GDPR was a great driver almost a year ago when everybody needed to be compliant with it. And again, client migration, as I explained in the previous slide. Then how Scanner works. Before we proceed to the demo, let's understand the architecture. Then Scanner is a Windows service. It's installed on Windows machine. It's recommended to run it on the separate dedicated machine rather than running it on the file server itself, because it can be CPU and memory consuming. The scan is done asynchronously, means the scanner goes and crawls repositories, discovers new files, and applies the policies there. Scanner uses SQL database as a backend in order to store its configuration there, and in order to remember or to keep the list of files that were already scanned, in order to prioritize newly created files, and in order to avoid rescanning of the same files unless they were changed or if the policy was changed. The connection to cloud is optional, but very, very recommended, because you can run Scanner without the connection to cloud, but then you will be only able to run the discovery and classification. If you want to apply AIP protection, you have to connect your Scanner to the cloud, and it's much easier to manage Scanner when it's connected to the cloud, because the management, as you will see in a minute, is done in Azure Portal. And you can also monitor your machines there, and you see in what state your scanner is, and you can get central logging in AIP Analytics. And two targets for scanning right now are CIFS shares, file shares, NAS, NetApps, whatever, and SharePoint 2010, 13, 16. We can scan actually anything that can be accessed through SMB or CIFS. Then if you have your own filer that exposes this protocol, then Scanner should be able to scan it. Let's go to the demo. Then when you install your scanner, I'm not going to show the installation itself. It can take 10, 15 minutes. There is a great blog that our CXE guy, Kevin, published on our community. Then I really encourage you to go and read the blog and deploy the scanner using his instructions. He wrote a lot of scripting stuff. You can just copy and paste from his blog and install Scanner very easily. Then once you deploy your scanner, it will be shown here in this nodes management console. And it will also be connected to the profile, which is very important to specify when you install the scanner. If you don't specify the profile name, because it's an optional parameter, the profile name will be set to the scanner machine name. For example, here I installed my scanner on some endpoint, and I didn't specify the profile name. That's why it got this profile name. Then from this from this screen, you can manage your scanner. You can see if it's running now, if it's offline, idle. You can see the details of last scan, and you can initiate actually on-demand scans, rescan of all files, and manage your nodes. But where do you define what Scanner does? Then you can manage Scanner in two ways. Right now, the current GA version is managed using local PowerShell. We heard your feedback that the customers wanted a central management. That's why we released the preview version in January that moved all the management to the central console. And this version is going to be GA next month. Then the latest GA in Q2 will use this console. Then here you specify what your scanner actually does. This is a scanner profile. Then you can set if scanner runs in the manual scheduling, or it runs always. Like it scans all the repositories, and once it finishes, it will start to rescan the same repositories again. You can define how content is discovered. Are you using just your policy conditions, or you are running it in discovery all mode, which means discover anything that we can discover. Try to match any known sensitive information type or any condition that we defined in the policy. The recommendation is, if you know what you're searching for, use the policy only. It's running a bit faster, gets better performance. But if you don't know what you own, and believe me, most of you don't really know what's there, even if you think it's there, then I would encourage you to start with all info types, see what you get, and then based on this, you can decide if you switch to policy only and configure your own conditions, or you just continue to discover all known information types, because we are adding more and more stuff. For example, just before RSA, we added around 10 new patterns that can detect Azure credentials and connection strings stored in documents. And credential was actually was the most common request of what is considered to be sensitive across all our customers. Here you can specify the repositories. These are the repositories that I'm scanning, the SharePoint or the share. And inside the repository, I can set different settings for this specific repository. It can either take settings from the profile, which are actually set here. You can set if the scanner is running in the enforcement mode. Are you labeling based on content, or just apply a default label? What's the default label for this repository? Are files relabeled or not? Do you allow scanner to downgrade the label? And do you preserve the date modified or last modified and modified by settings? Or what file types you are scanning or excluding from scan? Then all the settings can be rewritten per repository. And the main use case for it, think about you are running the scanner for a lot of time already, and you want to add a new repository. Then you no longer need, like in the previous versions, to create a new profile and tell we are going to run a new scanner just in discovery mode. You can just tell, okay, everything is running here, for example, in enforce on, but this new repository will run just in enforce off. Then the same profile will enforce your policy on all existing repositories, but it will run in discovery mode just on the new repository. And let me take you, and now after we understood what is done in the profile, let's go to the nodes and let's initiate some scan. And I will initiate the scan here. It can take up to 5 minutes until scanner gets the instruction. The architecture is like this. The portal never accesses your scanner because it's on premises. The scanner polls and checks if there are new instructions on the portal every 5 minutes. And once it got the instruction, it's starting to scan. Then here, for example, my scanner started to scan. And once the scan is started, you will start getting your information on newly discovered files in the data discovery dashboard. Then here, for example, I see that I had few repositories reported by scanner and actually by endpoints, which I will cover a bit later. But for example, here I can drill down to the specific share and see what was found there, or I can take another approach and tell, okay, I want to know, for example, where are all my Azure secrets stored? Azure secrets stored. Let me just choose all of them. Then I can just choose all the Azure secrets, apply the filter, and then I know where all of my credentials are stored. For example, here I found more than 1,000 of secrets, credentials stored in files, and you see they are not labeled and protected. I can drill down here and check the actual files themselves. If you enable the option, you will also see the content itself. It can help your DLP team to investigate and to understand what exact content is there, what was matched. You can disable this thing because it can be sensitive. Then it's up to you. It's configured under configuration analytics. In here, you enable or disable reporting of content itself. It's important to understand where the data is stored. It's stored inside your tenant in OMS workspace, and you manage the permissions of who can get access to this workspace. It's not stored in some system service. it's stored inside your tenant, and the storage is compliant with all the regulations and compliances that OMS is aligned. Then let's go back to our scanner and see if it finished the scan. Then usually what you will do after the scanner is finished, you will review your discovery, you will get the reports, and then you will decide if it's good enough for you or not. If not, you can change your policies and tweak your policies. But if it's good, you can go and now proceed to the next step, which is enforcement of policy. The enforcement of policy, unlike the discovery, usually is executed in continuous mode. Then when you are confident with the discovery report, you usually will switch it to enforce on, and you will set the scanner just to run always, which means continuously discover newly created files in all set repositories. Let's go back to the presentation. And let's talk now about the endpoint data discovery. There are two components that allow you to perform endpoint discovery. And when I'm talking about endpoint discovery, I'm talking about files that are residing on the endpoint or that are processed by the endpoint. Then the first one is AIP client. This ability, the discovery ability by AIP client is currently in private preview. What you get now from AIP client is all events of set, remove, or relabels. Actually, any interaction of the end user with the AIP software is logged and sent to the central logging. What we are adding, what we are adding in the next quarter, and we're running now the private preview of it, is being able to send information about sensitive data types detected in files. When AIP client is running on the inside the Office applications, then even if the labeling event didn't happen, or even if you don't monitor, let's say you don't have credit cards set in your conditions, even in this case, AIP client will report and feed you with the information that your users are storing credit cards in the documents. And then you can see this in the activity report and decide based on this, is it valuable for you? Should you start protecting it? Should you start scanning it? Another thing that it will allow you is it will reveal all the locations that users are using to store their confidential data, because maybe you would like to add these repositories to your scanner and proactively scan all these repositories. The requirement for AIP client is it's the same requirement like for any AIP client, Windows 7, 8, 10, Office 2010, 13, 16. But the limitation is that all these discovery capabilities on the endpoint are running inside Office app, or as long as you run PowerShell or something. Which brings us to a much better solution, which is integration between Windows Defender EDP and AIP. Windows Defender EDP is a built-in service inside Windows operating system, and it allows us to monitor all downloaded, newly created, modified files on the Windows endpoint and report on existing label on them. For example, if you download a confidential report to your C drive or even to your USB drive, and you don't open the file, then AIP client will not be able to see it, but Windows Defender EDP will, and it will report about it. Then the best experience you will get is from discovery using Windows Defender EDP. The disadvantage there that you will need the latest operating system build. The ability to report on labels on existing files was shipped in RS5, which is a last fall release. And we are working now on enriching the Windows Defender EDP discovery by supporting sensitive information types, built-in and custom. And this is planned to be available in spring build of Windows. And how do you enable it? For Windows Defender EDP, you need to enable this toggle for integration of Windows Defender EDP with AIP, and you will need the latest Windows build. For AIP discovery, it's currently in private preview, is going to be released very soon in early Q2 to the public one. And you will need to have the latest preview or the Q2 GA in order to start report this stuff. Which means if you're already running the preview version, once it just becomes publicly available, you can just turn it on AIP portal and use it. And this is what you are going to get once the endpoint discovery is running. And maybe let me even switch to my deployment. Let me go to dashboard. As you see here, I'm already on this preview. Then I can go and choose in the location type endpoints and get the endpoints that are reporting events. Another thing that you gain with the Windows Defender EDP is that we also get the risk of the endpoint. Then if you want to concentrate on let's say on the most risky stuff, then the flow will be choose the most confidential content or choose the most sensitive information types and go for endpoints with the highest risk. It will allow you to decide what should be handled first. Another thing that can help you is the AIP activity logs. And AIP activity logs get events from all workloads that we're running now. Windows Defender EDP, AIP client, scanner, and we are adding the MCAS events there later in Q2. And here we can actually trace the file and see who labeled the file, who protected the file, and we are also going to onboard RMS logs, RMS consumption logs into it. Then you will have in Q2 a complete story from document creation through document labeling, relabeling, sharing, opening, even if it's outside your tenant, and following what's happening with the document through the entire document lifecycle. Now, finally, I'm getting to the cloud discovery. Cloud discovery is about integration of AIP and MCAS. MCAS, which this is Microsoft Cloud App Security. It has a lot of different capabilities. There's the cloud discovery, application discovery, data visibility. Then we are going to talk here just about what MCAS can do with AIP for file discovery. But MCAS has much more capabilities than just the file discovery. Then in order to enable AIP integration with MCAS, you need to go to the settings on MCAS portal. Actually, maybe even let me just switch to MCAS portal. Yes. Then you should go to settings. And then you should enable integration with Azure Information Protection. Here, there are a few options that you might decide to enable. Like if you want to see only labels on files that were applied by your tenant and not by other tenants, in case, let's say, somebody shared the document from his organization with you, then and you don't want to see his labels there, then you should enable this option. And there is something new that we enable the inspection of protected files, which means even if the file is encrypted with AIP, MCAS can go into the file. And if you enable it, it will be able to inspect content of encrypted files, which is actually very great a new capability that will allow you to have a visibility on content regardless if the file is protected or not. Then once you enable this integration, what you can do is go and create a policy for file discovery. I already defined the one for GDPR data in SharePoint Online. Then what I did here, I told to discover content using all these information types. And this is another point which is very important. We are using the same automatic classification capabilities across all our services, Office 365 DLP, MCAS, and AIP. As long as you choose data classification service here instead of the built-in DLP in MCAS, and we encourage to use this option because it uses the same engine, and add the required patterns. I also enable here inspection of protected files because I want to look into the files and ensure that the files are labeled and encrypted properly. And I apply this rule on my OneDrive and SharePoint Online. I'm telling if you detect this content, then you apply label confidential GDPR. Later on, you can go to the file activities and you can get the report of all discovered and labeled files. For example, here I have this file. It matched the policy. It applied the confidential GDPR label. You can also see that label is applied here. And what is more important about MCAS is that you can also do it for Box. For example, here I enable the same rule for Box. And I uploaded the file, confidential document, to my Box environment. And then this file was crawled by MCAS, and the same MIP label was applied on document in Box. And now, when we covered data on-prem, data on endpoints, and data in the cloud, let's talk about best practices. How should you start? Then we recommend you to start the MIP journey from discovery. And why is it? First of all, because you need to know where is your data. And the second one, the deployment of clients can take some time. Then don't wait with a project until you need to package the client and deploy it. You can start with data discovery using MCAS and AIP scanner in parallel to your packaging and testing and deployment. And once you have your endpoints deployed with the scanner, you will already have a lot of information of data at rest. Another idea why to start from scanner and MCAS is because you have a lot of existing data. It will take time to finish scan of all of it. Then as soon as you can start with it, and then start working on the clients and deploying clients and learn from the discovery coming in parallel to these client deployments. Then you will analyze the results and you will decide what conditions would you like to allow on labels, how you are going to automate your classification on the endpoints using the feeds that you get from scanner and MCAS. Then you use the discovery reports in order to observe the abnormal behavior. You can see if users are storing their confidential data or data that contains sensitive information but is not labeled as confidential to some public shares. And you can get, finally, once you deploy the clients, you can also get the AIP client reports and feed MCAS and AIP scanner with the repositories that you don't scan, but users do use to store the confidential data. Few tips about all of these solutions. Then, first of all, I encourage you to go and read this Optimizing the Performance of Scanner article. We always asked about the throughput that scanner can get. It depends on a lot of different aspects, like the file mix, file sizes, file types, the network, the I/O, the machine, the scanner machine profile, the policy, what you are detecting. Are you running in discovery mode or enforcement mode? For example, if you are running on CIFS or on SharePoint, CIFS is much faster. Then this article really takes you through what is the best thing to do, where you should locate the scanner, and what aspects impacting the scanner throughput. At the end, if you want to know how much time it's going to take for a scanner to scan all your data at rest, the only thing that you can do is to run some sample scan for 1-2 days, see the rates, and these are the average rate that you will get in your environment. We in Microsoft got rates of, depending on the repositories, from 5 to 50 megabytes on discovery and from 2 to 10 megabytes on enforcement. But again, it's very, very environment related. Then you really need to test it in your environment to understand how much time is it going to take for you. Then the recommendation, first of all, try to detect all known information types, unless you're really, really sure you know what you're searching for. Run the scanner in discovery, analyze, and then switch to always plus enforce, meaning continuous scan, enforcement of labeling and protection. Put the scanner near the scanner repositories. The scanner copies the file from the repository to its memory in order to inspect the content. The inspection is done on the scanner. It offloads the decryption and encryption work from the repository, but it means that you need to have a reliable network between scanner node and the scan repository. Use repository settings if you have some repository specific behaviors. Means don't create profile for every repository. You can set different settings for different repositories in the same profile, and the same scanner machine will apply these different settings in different repositories. For AIP analytics, we recommend you to use a discovery to identify repositories that are not scanned right now. For example, if the end user stores confidential data to some share that you were not aware of, then maybe it's abnormal. Maybe you should talk to user and and educate him. But maybe there are a lot of others that are also doing it, or there is a system that generates a report and stores it there. Then add this repository to the scanner in order to see what you get there and in order to enforce your policy there. Use discovery dashboard to identify discovery information types and set automatic rules. There is a new feature that is coming in Q2 that will help you with this. We're going to recommend you to create automation rules based on what we discovered right now, but the data is already there. We are going to create a nice UI to help you with this, but raw data already includes all this, and you can go there now and get all this information. And for MCAS, set label discovery to identify labels from your org. You don't want to see noise from other orgs. And enable protected file inspection if you want to see content of ad hoc protected files. I put few sample queries here for you that will enable you to get raw data. Let me just show you what you can do. Then all the data is stored in OMS log analytics. Then I have few samples here, and for example, here I'm getting all files that are labeled with a GDPR label. And then you can use, for example, Power BI to connect to this source, or you can connect it to your own SIEM and get much more information than you get in the dashboard in AIP. Then dashboard in AIP should cover most of your stuff, but if you want to create your custom reports, you can use this raw data here. And I put few examples here in order to enable you to just to modify these queries and get what you want to get from the raw logs. Let's talk about roadmap. Then this is what we recently shipped, the scanner operation UI and scanner configuration UI. I've showed it earlier. We shipped the WDATP discovery of label files in RS5 fall release. We added GDPR and Azure credential sensitive information types. Azure credentials were just added in this quarter. Something new. If you are working with Azure IaaS and Azure PaaS, I really encourage you to go and inspect for this content, because users still tend to store credentials in files. And inspection of protected files in MCAS, I was really happy to see this happening. And this is what we are going to release in next 2 quarters. We're going to GA all current previews. We're going to ship Windows Defender EDP discovery for information types, not only for labels. Scanner scale out. Currently, single scanner can work with one profile. We want more scanners to share load and participate in the same profile. The North Star is take your 40 machines and go and scan everything, and they will split their load between themselves and scan everything. Scanner is going to be supporting unified labeling client. I'm not sure if it was covered in previous session, but for sure you are going to have a session about the unified labeling, which is bringing everything to one central console, security and compliance center, to manage all the policies. Then Scanner is coming in late Q2 on top of unified labeling client, which means you will manage all policies just in SCC, and you no longer need AIP portal to manage labels. Scanner is going to support custom information types and dictionaries as a part of onboarding to unified labeling client. And we're going to come with analytics recommendations based on discoveries, like recommend you what need to be scanned, because some customers tell us we don't know what we should scan. Then we will feed you with this information based on AIP client logs, and recommending you what information types should be set for specific labels. And this is all from my side. I'm opening this session for questions. I'm handing over to Adam, or Adam, would you like to share questions or anything else?
Hi, Dennis. Thank you very much for that. That was great. Yeah, so there's a couple of things that have kind of popped up. I think some of these may be very quick answers, but just to get a bit of insight. One of the questions came up for Scanner is there any plans for us to support Mac OS or Linux endpoints?
Then there is work that, then first of all, for AIP Scanner, no. We are not going to ship AIP Scanner for endpoints, but there is a work. We believe that Windows Defender EDP should do this job for endpoints, for Windows endpoints. There are a few partners that work with us on Mac and Linux endpoints that work with Windows Defender EDP, and there is a plan to ship something with them. It's not going to happen in next quarter, but we are in active work with partners to deliver a solution for Mac and Linux.
Excellent. I'm sure that'll be well received. So, I mean, this is kind of going more into the analytics side, but as you know, the scanner kind of feeds its data into that. A couple of questions kind of came up around permissions required for the
then
permissions.
Yeah, there is a permission that you need to grant on the. Let me try to show it on the workspace. Then when you create a workspace, you need to grant a permission. You need to grant a permission, read permission on the workspace in order to enable the person that browses the AIP analytics in order to get the AIP dashboard.
Excellent.
And by the way, it's not enough to have just a global admin. You really need to go and grant permission on the workspace. There is no role. You need to specifically go and grant the permission.
Excellent. That's a good nugget to share, I think. Do we have any? I mean, obviously, when scanning repositories, we need access to those repositories. I don't know if there's really much more we can expand on around that side of things, but we did have a few permissions questions come up.
Yep. Then scanner needs at least read access to the scan repository to run discovery. Scanner needs to have read, write, modify permissions in case you're running it in label and encrypt. This is, by the way, how you grant permissions on the workspace.
Excellent. I'm just having a look through the list at the moment. We've had some through the course of the session that were more kind of generic AIP as opposed to, you know, the topic we were.
Let's use this time. If we have the generic questions, I'm okay also with the generic ones.
Okay. So there's been a lot of interest around our move to the Security Compliance Center and what that means for the, you know, the various.
Okay. Yeah. Then customers that used to work with AIP in last 3 years, then you manage this your labels and policies here. Then activation of unified labeling means that we want to enable all Microsoft workloads and all workloads that use MIP SDK, for example, Adobe, to be able to read these labels. Then you need to go to this place named named unified labeling and activate your unified labeling. It moves your labels from a proprietary store managed by AIP to one unified store that can be used by all Microsoft workloads. It takes a few minutes, and then you are landing, and then your labels are going to be available in the Office Security and Compliance Center. Let me just browse it. And once your labels are here, it doesn't matter where you edit them, in SCC or in AIP, it's the same label. It also enables all the new workloads like SharePoint, native labeling in Mac, iOS, Android, to be able to recognize also already applied labels there. That's why it's very important to migrate your labels. If you just start working with the classifications here in SCC without migration of your labels, then you will just create a new ones. Then before you start working with this, go and migrate your labels. I know there is another question about when it's going to be GA'd. Early Q2 is planned to be the timeline to GA this capability. Performing this migration, by the way, doesn't mean that your tenant becomes a preview tenant right now. Only the migration experience in the preview, but once it's finished, SCC is in GA, AIP is in GA, then there is no reason why not to do it, but it will take 4 to 6 weeks until we GA this capability, and then it will be GA end-to-end. Did I answer your question?
Yeah, I think that was pretty good coverage. I sort of think the last one to call out perhaps was just I think we've generated a bit of confusion around our Windows Defender ATP, and the question here, and I'll read it because I'm not sure I understand it, is not sure I understand the current limitations on Windows Defender ATP, discover labels versus discover sensitive information on the roadmap. Currently can only discover labeled documents.
Yeah, let me go back to the comparison of. Okay, then current Windows build can report events in case that file is created, for example, downloaded or modified on the endpoint, and it can report the current label of the file. If the label was changed, then it will report the new label. It cannot report right now if there is a credit card inside file or not. This is the plan for the spring release of Windows. Windows Defender ATP in spring release will be able to tell you this is the current label, this is the content that we detected, and this is the label that should be on the file based on the content.
Excellent. I think that should help clear that one up. Well, look, I think that's pretty much it from a Q&A perspective. If there's nothing anyone else wants to add, and I'll just pause for a moment for the Microsoft team. I will take that as a no. So just want a final reminder to thank everyone for attending today. If for some reason you don't have the rest of the series, you can find it at aka.ms/AIP webinar. It's on the screen. You can also find the recordings at aka.ms/AIP recordings, which is also on the screen. And do please come join the community if you haven't already. Thank you everyone for joining us today. Thanks for being part of our community, and we hope to see you again next week. So, thank you.